I'm Teresa, 31 female. My husband Mark and I live in a modest 3-bedroom house in a quiet suburban neighborhood, the kind of place we'd always dreamed of raising a family. I work from home as a graphic designer, which has been a blessing during my pregnancy, and Mark is a software engineer for a tech firm downtown. For the last 5 years, our life together has been a comfortable rhythm of work, weekend hikes, and quiet evenings, a peaceful existence we built for ourselves. But that peace was about to be shattered by the one person who should have been our biggest supporter. This is the story of how my mother-in-law, a woman who smiled to my face while systematically undermining me, took her control too far. It's about how she turned the most sacred space in our home, our baby's nursery, into a battleground for her own ego, and how my quiet, unassuming husband finally found his voice and helped me not just reclaim our home, but redefine our entire family dynamic forever. Before this story unfolds, I'd love to connect with you. Please let me know in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is in your corner of the world. It's amazing to see how far these stories can travel. The nursery project was my baby before the baby. As a graphic designer, my world revolves around color palettes, typography, and the emotional resonance of visual space. This room wasn't just 4 walls. It was the first hello to our child, a visual lullaby I was composing with love, care, and a meticulous amount of planning. For months, I'd been curating a Pinterest board, collecting fabric swatches and sketching out murals. The theme was a gentle, whimsical forest with soft, gender-neutral tones, sage green, muted ochre, and warm creams. I imagined our baby sleeping under a canopy of hand-painted leaves, surrounded by soft, plush woodland creatures. It was personal, it was heartfelt, and it was entirely mine. Mark, bless his logical, code-driven heart, was wonderfully supportive. He'd look at my swatches with a thoughtful expression and say things like, "That hex code has a very calming wavelength, honey. Good choice." For him, the project was about making me happy and ensuring the crib was assembled to flawless structural specifications. He was the engineer, and I was the architect of this tiny dream. We were a perfect team. The only variable we hadn't properly accounted for was his mother, Eleanor. At 58, Eleanor was a retired interior designer, a fact she mentioned in nearly every conversation. Her own home was a testament to her career, a pristine, minimalist space that felt more like a modern art gallery than a place where people actually lived. It was beautiful, I suppose, but cold and impersonal, filled with sharp angles, chrome, and imposing abstract art. It was the complete opposite of the warm, cozy, slightly cluttered aesthetic I cherished. From the moment we announced the pregnancy, Eleanor's advice began. At first, it was subtle. "Oh, Teresa, that's a lovely thought," she'd say when I showed her a picture of a rustic wooden crib, "but have you considered the clean lines of acrylic, so much more hygienic and visually unobtrusive?" I'd smile politely and say, "We're really leaning towards a more natural feel, Eleanor, but thanks for the suggestion." She'd just hum, a little non-committal sound that I would later understand was her version of filing my opinion away under, to be corrected later. As I began purchasing items, her comments became more pointed. The sage green paint I'd chosen was, in her expert opinion, a bit dated. The plush owl mobile I adored was lacking in developmental stimulation. The soft, hand-knitted blanket my own mother had made was a lovely gesture, but would clash horribly with any modern design. Each visit from her felt less like a social call and more like a professional consultation I hadn't asked for and certainly wasn't paying for. I tried to steer the conversation away to talk about baby names or our plans for parental leave, but she would always circle back to the nursery. "I just want the baby to have the very best, darling," she'd say, patting my hand with a look of feigned sincerity. "And I do have a professional eye for these things." Mark, for his part, tried to run interference, but he saw his mother through the filter of a loving son. To him, she was just an enthusiastic, helpful grandmother-to-be. "She's just excited, Tess," he'd tell me after she left, wrapping his arms around me. "She doesn't mean to be pushy. It's her way of showing she cares." I wanted to believe him, I really did. I tried to tell myself I was being oversensitive, that my pregnancy hormones were making me territorial. So I'd bite my tongue, smile, and change the subject. The issue of the spare key came up a month before the baby was due. We were planning a baby-moon, our last little getaway before 2 became 3. It was just a 3-day trip to a quiet cabin by a lake, about 2 hours away. Eleanor insisted we leave a key with her just in case of an emergency. She painted a dozen different scenarios, from a pipe bursting to a package being delivered that needed to be signed for. "You can't be too careful," she said, her tone leaving no room for argument. I was hesitant. I'd never felt comfortable with anyone having unfettered access to my home, my sanctuary. It felt like a violation of privacy. I voiced my concerns to Mark gently. "Couldn't we just leave a key with Samantha?" I suggested. "She only lives 15 minutes away," Mark sighed. "It would really hurt Mom's feelings, Tess. She feels like she's the family's first line of defense. It's a gesture of trust. We can trust her." Seeing the look on his face, the earnest plea to just keep the peace, I relented. It was just for a weekend, after all. What could possibly happen in 3 days? I handed over the key, a small, cold piece of metal that felt unnervingly heavy in my palm. Eleanor beamed, tucking it into her purse as if it were a trophy. "You won't even know I'm here," she promised. That was a promise she was destined to break in the most spectacular and devastating way imaginable. The nursery was almost finished, waiting only for the mural I planned to paint myself. The furniture was assembled, the rug was down, and the little clothes were folded in the dresser. It was a space filled with hope and love, a room waiting for its tiny occupant. As we packed our bags for the trip, I took one last look at it, a proud smile on my face. It was perfect. The weekend was everything we needed. We disconnected from our phones, we hiked through the woods, and we sat by the fire at night, talking about our hopes and fears for the future. For 3 blissful days, there was no talk of color palettes or acrylic furniture. There was no unsolicited advice, no subtle condescension. It was just Mark and me, and the gentle kicks of our baby reminding us of the new chapter we were about to begin. We felt rested, reconnected, and ready to face the final stretch of the pregnancy as a united front. The feeling of peace was so profound that it made what came next feel even more like a physical blow. We drove home on Sunday afternoon, arriving just as the sun was beginning to set. The house looked exactly as we'd left it, quiet and unassuming. Mark carried our bags in while I, feeling the familiar ache in my lower back, went straight upstairs. I wanted to put my feet up and then maybe unpack a few things. My first instinct, as it always was to peek into the nursery. I wanted to see my beautiful, calm, sage-green room and feel that sense of joyful anticipation wash over me again. I pushed the door open, a tired smile on my face, and stopped dead. The smile dissolved. My heart, which had been beating in a slow, contented rhythm, suddenly slammed against my ribs like a trapped bird. For a moment, my brain simply refused to process what my eyes were seeing. I blinked, convinced I was hallucinating, that the fatigue from the drive was playing tricks on me. But the image didn't change. It was real. The room was no longer mine. The soft sage green on the walls was gone, replaced by a stark, sterile white. My beautiful, rustic wooden crib had been dismantled and was nowhere to be seen. In its place stood a monstrosity of clear acrylic and chrome, exactly like the one Eleanor had suggested. The plush, whimsical mobile I'd spent weeks searching for was gone, and hanging over the new crib was a jarring, high-contrast black and white geometric shape, supposedly for optimal infant neurological development. My hand-painted woodland creature prints had been taken down from the walls, replaced by abstract canvases of clashing primary colors. The soft, cream-colored rug was gone, and the floor was bare, cold wood. Even the curtains, a lovely linen with a subtle leaf pattern, had been swapped out for severe, gray blackout blinds. Every single choice I had made, every piece of my heart that I had poured into this room, had been systematically erased and replaced with Eleanor's cold, clinical aesthetic. It wasn't a nursery anymore. It was an exhibit. It was her showroom. I stumbled backwards, my hand flying to my mouth. A wave of nausea, more potent than any morning sickness I'd experienced, rose in my throat. I couldn't breathe. My gaze darted around the room, desperately searching for any trace of what had been there before. Where was my rocking chair, the one I'd inherited from my grandmother? Where was the bookshelf Mark had so carefully assembled? Where was the blanket my mother had knitted? It was all gone. Vanished. "Mark," I whispered, but no sound came out. I tried again, my voice cracking. "Mark!" He came running up the stairs, his face etched with concern. "What's wrong, Tess? Are you okay? Is it the baby?" He stopped in the doorway, his eyes widening as he took in the scene. His initial confusion quickly melted into disbelief. "What tea is this? What happened?" he stammered, looking from the acrylic crib to my face. The shock was beginning to recede, and in its place, a white-hot rage was building. "She was here," I said, my voice dangerously low. "Your mother was here." Mark walked into the room, touching the cold metal frame of the new crib as if he couldn't believe it was real. "No, she couldn't have." But even as he said it, we both knew he was wrong. Who else could have done this? Who else had a key? Who else had the gall, the audacity, to so completely violate our home and our trust? "Where is our stuff, Mark?" I asked, my voice rising with every word. "Where is everything I bought? The crib, the blankets, everything?" We looked in the spare room. Nothing. We checked the garage. In a corner, shoved behind some old paint cans, was a pile of disassembled wood. It was my crib, the one I had so lovingly chosen, taken apart like a piece of garbage. Lying on top of it in a black trash bag were all the other items: the mobile, the prints, the curtains. They hadn't even been packed away with care. They'd been treated like refuse. Seeing the beautiful blanket my mom had poured hours of love into crumpled in a trash bag, was what finally broke me. A gut-wrenching sob escaped my lips, a sound of pure anguish and fury. This wasn't a redecoration. It was an annihilation. It was a statement. It was a leaner declaring that my taste, my choices, my very identity as the mother of this child were worthless. She hadn't just changed a room, she had tried to erase me from it. And I sank onto the floor of that cold, alien room, crying with a rage so profound it felt like it could burn the entire house down. I sat on the cold, bare floor of the nursery that wasn't, with the harsh glare of the overhead light reflecting off the chrome and acrylic that had invaded my sanctuary. The tears streamed down my face, hot and furious. It wasn't just sadness, it was a deep, primal rage that shook my entire body. Every sob was a protest against the sheer arrogance, the profound disrespect. Mark stood frozen in the doorway, his face pale with shock. He kept opening and closing his mouth, but no words came out. He was a man who solved problems with logic and code, and this emotional devastation, this blatant act of domestic warfare, was a language he didn't understand. "She threw it away," I choked out, pointing a trembling finger towards the garage. "She dismantled our crib and put everything in trash bags, Mark, like it was garbage." That seemed to snap him out of his paralysis. He knelt down beside me, trying to pull me into a hug, but I flinched away. I didn't want comfort right now. Comfort felt like acceptance. I wanted him to feel the same burning anger I did. "I'm so sorry, Tess," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "I can't believe. I never thought." "You never thought what?" I shot back, my voice raw. "That your mother was capable of this, because I did. I felt it every time she came over, every time she criticized a paint chip or a piece of furniture. This wasn't a surprise, Mark. This was a declaration of war." My words hung in the air, sharp and heavy. I could see the hurt in his eyes, but I couldn't bring myself to soften them. He had been the one to insist we give her the key. He had been the one to tell me I was overreacting, that she was just being helpful. His inability to see what was so clear to me had enabled this. It felt like a betrayal from both of them. "I'm going to call her," he said, his jaw tightening. He pulled out his phone, his hands shaking slightly. "This is not okay." He was right. It wasn't okay. It was a complete and utter violation. While he stepped into the hallway to make the call, I pushed myself up from the floor, my body aching with tension. I walked around the room, running my hand over the cold, sterile furniture she had chosen. It felt alien, like I was a stranger in my own home. I looked at the abstract art on the walls, bold, clashing colors that felt aggressive and jarring. This wasn't a space for a baby. It was a space designed to scream, "Eleanor was here. Eleanor is in charge." I could hear Mark's voice from the hall, low and tense at first, then rising in disbelief. "What do you mean a surprise? Mom, you can't just know, that's not helping. You threw out all of Teresa's things. What do you mean, an upgrade? A gift? You call this a gift? I leaned against the door frame, listening, my heart hardening with every word I overheard. She wasn't apologetic. She was proud. In her twisted mind, she had done us a favor. She had saved her grandchild from my supposedly poor taste. She truly believed she had the right to march into our home and impose her will, simply because she was the grandmother and a professional. Mark came back into the room, his face ashen. He looked defeated. She doesn't get it, he said, shaking his head in disbelief. She genuinely thinks she did a wonderful thing. She called it a nursery makeover gift and said she'd send the bill for the furniture later so we could contribute what we felt was fair. She said she saved all the receipts. The bill, the sheer, unmitigated audacity of it sent a fresh wave of fury through me. She expected us to pay for this violation. She expected us to thank her for it. That was the moment something inside me changed. The heartbroken, sobbing woman on the floor was gone. In her place was someone cold and clear and resolute. The tears stopped. My breathing evened out. The chaotic storm of emotion inside me coalesced into a single, sharp point of purpose. No, I said, my voice steady and devoid of any emotion. Mark looked at me, confused. No, he repeated. No, I said again, more firmly. We are not keeping a single thing in this room. We are not paying her a single cent. And she is never, ever setting foot in this house again until we get a sincere, heartfelt apology. And we are changing the locks. Mark stared at me. I think he was seeing a side of me he'd never seen before. I had always been the peacemaker, the one who would go along to get along, especially when it came to his family. But that Teresa was gone, and the woman standing in front of him was done being accommodating. This wasn't just about a room anymore. It was about respect. It was about boundaries. It was about whose house, whose life, and whose baby this was. And then I saw the shift in him, too. He looked around the cold, white room at the alien furniture and then back at my face. He saw the pain she had caused, the joy she had stolen. He saw that his attempts to mediate and placate had failed spectacularly and had only left me, his pregnant wife, devastated. The fog of "she's just my mom" finally lifted from his eyes, and he saw Alina for what she had just done, a hostile takeover of our life. "You're right," he said, his voice quiet but firm. "You're absolutely right. I am so sorry, Tess. I should have listened to you. I should have protected you from this, from her." He stepped forward, and this time, when he wrapped his arms around me, I didn't pull away. I leaned into him, not for comfort, but for solidarity. We were a team again. "Let's get this stuff out of here," he said, his voice filled with a new, steely resolve. "Tonight." And just like that, the shock and the sobbing were over. The shift had happened. We weren't victims anymore. We were partners, and we were about to take back our home. The adrenaline from our newfound resolve carried us through the next few hours. We worked in a kind of grim, determined silence. Mark, with his engineer's efficiency, started disassembling the acrylic crib. The screech of the Allen key against the metal bolts was a satisfyingly angry sound in the quiet house. I, meanwhile, started taking the garish, abstract canvases off the walls, leaving behind ugly scars from the picture hooks Alina had hammered in with such confidence. We piled everything, the crib pieces, the geometric mobile, the blinds, the art, in the middle of the room. It was a monument to Alina's arrogance. As we worked, we started talking. Not about the nursery, but about everything that had led up to this moment. It was as if the destruction of the room had broken a dam between us, releasing years of unspoken resentments and ignored red flags. We were finally addressing the Alina problem head-on. "Remember my 30th birthday?" I asked, carefully wrapping one of the canvases in an old sheet. "The surprise party you planned for me?" Mark paused, a look of dawning comprehension on his face. "You told her my favorite cake was carrot cake," I continued. "She showed up with a lemon chiffon cake from the most expensive bakery in town. She said carrot cake was terribly pedestrian, and she couldn't possibly serve that to her friends." At the time, I'd laughed it off, not wanting to spoil the party. Mark had apologized, saying his mom just got carried away. But now, looking back, it wasn't a mistake. It was a deliberate act of replacement, a smaller version of what she'd just done to the nursery. She had replaced my choice with hers, declaring her superior. Mark sank down onto the floor, the Allen key forgotten in his hand. "Oh my God," he whispered. "And Christmas, 2 years ago, we were supposed to host. She called me a week before, saying she'd told the whole family to come to her house instead because our dining room was too small for a proper gathering, and she didn't want me to feel stressed." He had presented it to me as a favor from his mom, a way to take the pressure off us. But it was. It was another power play. She had usurped our role as hosts, recentering the family holiday at her home, where she was in control. The more we talked, the more the pattern emerged, clear and undeniable. It was a tapestry of 1,000 tiny cuts. There was the time she'd, helpfully, reorganized our entire kitchen while we were out, putting everything in more logical places so I couldn't find anything for weeks. The time she'd bought Mark a whole new wardrobe of designer shirts because she felt my choices for him were unbefitting of a successful engineer. The constant, backhanded compliments about my career. "It's so lovely that you have your little design hobby, Teresa. It must be fun to be creative." She never once referred to it as my business or my job. Each incident, taken alone, had seemed small enough to ignore. We had explained them away as quirks, as generational differences, as her way of showing she cares. But stacked one on top of the other, they formed a mountain of disrespect. Eleanor didn't see me as Mark's partner, an adult woman with her own tastes, career, and opinions. She saw me as a temporary placeholder, an incompetent manager of her son's life, who needed to be constantly corrected and overridden for his own good. And now, for our child's good. This realization was sickening, but also strangely liberating. I wasn't crazy. I hadn't been oversensitive. I had been systematically undermined for years, and my husband, out of a misguided sense of loyalty to his mother, had been complicit in his silence. Seeing the shame and regret on Mark's face was painful, but necessary. He was finally understanding the full scope of what I had been dealing with. "I've been such an idiot," he said, running his hands through his hair. "I always just saw her as my mom. I never saw the way she was treating us." "It's not just you," I said, sitting beside him. "She's good at what she does. She wraps every criticism in a cloak of concern. She makes you feel like you're the ungrateful one if you object." We decided to call my best friend Samantha. As a paralegal specializing in family law, she was pragmatic, logical, and had a zero-tolerance policy for boundary crossing. I put the phone on speaker, and in a calm, steady voice, I explained everything that had happened, from the first piece of unsolicited advice to the horrifying discovery we'd just made. There was a long silence on the other end of the line. "Okay," Sam said finally, her voice radiating calm authority. "First, I am so sorry. This is a massive violation. Second, you are not to feel guilty for 1 second about being angry. Your anger is justified. Third, Mark, it's good that you're seeing this now. Better late than never." She took a deep breath. "Do not throw her stuff out. Do not damage it. You're going to inventory every single item she brought into your house and every single item of yours that she removed. Make a list. Take pictures. This is now a transactional dispute, not just a family squabble. She crossed a line, and you need to treat it with the seriousness it deserves. You're no longer dealing with a mother-in-law. You're dealing with an unauthorized contractor who has performed unsolicited work and is holding your property hostage." Her words were like a splash of cold water. She was right. We had to stop reacting emotionally and start acting strategically. The goal wasn't just to vent our anger, it was to permanently reclaim our autonomy. Following Sam's advice, we spent the next hour meticulously documenting everything. We photographed the pile of her furniture in the center of the room. We took pictures of my beautiful crib, disassembled and discarded in the garage. We wrote down every single item, creating 2 columns, unauthorized additions by a leaner and personal property removed by a leaner. The act of creating the list was empowering. It transformed our pain into data, our rage into evidence. This was the first step in not just redecorating a room, but restructuring our entire family. With Samantha's clear-headed advice ringing in our ears, the grief and rage we felt began to morph into something far more productive. A plan. We dubbed it Operation Reclaim and Reset. The reclaim part was immediate and physical. The reset was the long-term goal, to fundamentally change the rules of engagement with a leaner. This was never going to happen again. The first step was removing her influence from our house. Mark called a 24-hour storage facility and rented a 5x5 unit under his name. Then, in the dead of night, we loaded all of Aliner's furniture into his SUV. The cold chrome, the sterile acrylic, the jarring art, we handled it all like it was radioactive. With each piece we removed, the room started to breathe again. It felt less like a hostile territory and more like a blank canvas, full of potential. By 2 a.m., the nursery was completely empty, and Aliner's expensive, unwanted gift was sitting under lock and key in a storage unit 5 miles away. Step 2 was reclaiming my things. We carefully brought everything in from the garage. Laying the pieces of my disassembled crib on the floor felt like recovering artifacts from a shipwreck. There were a few scratches on the wood from being handled so carelessly, and seen. Them made my blood boil anew, but Mark, ever the engineer, examined each piece with a determined look. "I can fix this," he said. "I'll sand it, restain it where it's scratched. It will be perfect again. Better even." While he worked, I carefully unfolded the blankets, smoothed out the prints, and checked the mobile for damage. Everything was thankfully intact, just disrespected. The next morning, after a few hours of fitful sleep, we moved to the next phase, securing our fortress. Mark called a locksmith and scheduled an appointment for that afternoon. There would be no more surprise visits, no more unauthorized access. Our home was ours and ours alone. The most difficult part of the plan was the financial component. Aliner had mentioned sending a bill. Samantha had been adamant we needed to beat her to the punch. I spent the morning online, looking up the retail price of every single item she had purchased. The acrylic crib, the designer dresser, the blackout blinds, the abstract art, it all added up to an astronomical figure, nearly $5,000. Then, I did the same for all of my items that she had removed and discarded. I found the receipts for the things I had bought and estimated the value of the handmade gifts. The total was significant, well over $2,000. Armed with these numbers, we formulated our response. Samantha helped us draft an email. It was polite, firm, and entirely transactional. It began, "Dear Aliner, thank you for the thought you put into the nursery this weekend. However, as we did not authorize or request any changes to our home or any new purchases, we will not be able to accept your gift. We have moved all the items you purchased to a secure storage unit. The unit is paid for 1 month. Please let us know when you would like to arrange pickup." The email then listed, in meticulous detail, every item she had purchased, along with its retail value. The second part was the masterstroke, suggested by Sam. "Furthermore," it continued, "during the unauthorized renovation, several of our personal items were removed and damaged. We have compiled an itemized invoice for the cost of replacement and repair. The total comes to $2,350. Please see the attached invoice. We have also incurred a fee for the locksmith to resecure our home, which is included. We would appreciate payment within 30 days to close this matter." We attached a professionally designed invoice I created myself, complete with a Teresa and Mark Home letterhead. It listed services rendered, which included disposal fee for unsolicited goods, cost of repair for damaged personal property, and home security consultation fee, locksmith. It was petty, perhaps, but it was also perfect. It took her emotional manipulation and reframed it in the cold, hard language of business. A language she, with her constant talk of investment pieces and design value, would surely understand. Mark hesitated before we hit send. This is going to cause a nuclear explosion," he said, his hand hovering over the mouse. "I know," I replied, placing my hand over his. "But a forest fire sometimes clears out the dead wood so new things can grow. We can't keep living like this, Mark, always tiptoeing around her feelings while she stomps all over ours." He nodded, took a deep breath, and clicked send. The final piece of the plan was the key. The old key, the one that had caused all this trouble, we decided we wouldn't just let it disappear. It had to be returned, but in a way that sent a clear message. We put it in a small, velvet-lined ring box. It was a symbolic gesture. This key was once a symbol of trust, of family intimacy. Now it was just a piece of metal, its power revoked. It represented a relationship that was now closed, locked, and subject to new terms and conditions. Operation Reclaim and Reset was officially in motion. The ball was in her court, and for the first time in our relationship with her, we held all the cards. We were terrified, but we were also united and, strangely, exhilarated. We were finally fighting for our family. The silence after we sent the email was deafening. For a full 24 hours, there was no reply. No angry phone call, no barrage of texts. It was an eerie calm, the kind that comes before a storm. Mark and I spent the day working together to restore the nursery. He carefully sanded and repaired the scratches on the crib, his movements precise and focused. I repainted the walls, covering the sterile white with my warm, gentle sage green. With each brushstroke, I felt like I was physically reclaiming the space, painting my own peace and happiness back onto the walls. The room slowly transformed back into the sanctuary I had envisioned, but it felt different now. It was infused with a new strength, a resilience it hadn't had before. It wasn't just a dream nursery anymore, it was a victory. The explosion came on Tuesday evening, in the form of a call to Mark's phone. He put it on speaker, and we listened as Alina's voice, tight with fury, filled the room. "I received your absolutely outrageous email," she began, dispensing with any pleasantries. "And an invoice? Are you too serious? An invoice for a gift? I have never been so insulted in my entire life." Mark took a deep breath, clutching my hand under the table. He was a different man from the one who used to placate her. "Mom, it wasn't a gift. It was an invasion," he said, his voice calm and steady. "You came into our home without our permission and threw out things that were precious to us. You completely ignored Teresa's wishes and tried to force your own taste on us and our child. That's not a gift. It's a power move, and we're not playing that game anymore." There was a stunned silence on her end. I don't think she had ever heard Mark speak to her like that. I was trying to help," she sputtered, her voice rising in pitch. "That room was a mess of dated, sentimental clutter. I gave you a sophisticated, developmentally appropriate space. I used my professional expertise for you, for my grandchild. Our child will be surrounded by love and sentiment, not chrome and acrylic," I said, speaking up for the first time. "You didn't do this for the baby, Alina. You did this for you. You wanted to mark your territory." "How dare you?" she shrieked. "After everything I've done for you both." The conversation devolved from there, with her cycling through accusations, guilt-tripping, and feigned victimhood. She called us ungrateful, disrespectful, and cruel. She insisted we were embarrassing her. Through it all, Mark remained firm. He didn't raise his voice. He simply repeated the facts. "You violated our trust. You damaged our property. The invoice stands. The furniture is in storage. Let us know when you want to get it." The conversation ended when she hung up on him. The silence that followed was heavy, but we didn't feel defeated. We felt resolved. The next phase of the plan was the confrontation, and we knew it had to be in person. We invited her to our house for dinner that Saturday. We didn't frame it as a peace summit. The message simply said, "We need to discuss the new terms of our relationship moving forward. Please come to dinner on Saturday at 7. She arrived exactly on time, dressed in a severe black pantsuit, looking like she was heading to a hostile corporate merger, not a family dinner. The atmosphere was thick with tension. We made it through the meal with strained, polite small talk. Mark and I worked as a team, deflecting her attempts to drag the argument back out into the open before we were ready. Finally, after dinner, Mark cleared his throat. "Mom, we asked you here to establish some new rules." He slid a single sheet of paper across the table towards her. On it, we had typed out our family boundaries. It had 5 simple points. Our home is our private space. All visits must be scheduled in advance. There will be no more unannounced drop-ins. We will no longer keep a spare key for anyone outside of our household. Parenting decisions for our child will be made by us, and only us. We are not seeking advice unless we explicitly ask for it. Gifts for us or the baby are appreciated, but large items, furniture, gear, etc., must be discussed with us beforehand. We reserve the right to refuse any gift. Our relationship must be based on mutual respect. Criticism of our choices regarding our home, our careers, or our parenting will not be tolerated. Elena read the list, her lips thinning into a straight, white line. Her face was a mask of cold fury. "This is a ridiculous, insulting document," she said, pushing it back across the table. "This is a non-negotiable document," I replied quietly. "This is what we need to have a healthy relationship with you. This is what we need to protect our family." I then placed the small, velvet ring box on the table. "And this is yours." She opened it, her eyes widening slightly as she saw the key. It was a final, undeniable statement. Her access was revoked, literally and metaphorically. Mark then slid the printed invoice across the table next to the box. "We expect the payment for the damages to be settled, Mom, just as we expect you to pick up your furniture from storage. Once you've done that, and once you've had time to think about whether you can respect our boundaries, we can talk about what your role as a grandmother will look like." Elena stared at the list, the key, and the invoice. For a moment, I thought she might explode, scream, or storm out. But she did something else. She deflated. The fight seemed to go out of her. Perhaps she finally realized she had pushed too far, that the son she thought she could always control had finally built a firewall she couldn't breach. She stood up, her movement stiff. "I see," she said, her voice barely a whisper. She picked up her purse, leaving the list, the key, and the invoice on table. Without another word, she turned and walked out the door. We listened as her car started and drove away, leaving us in the quiet of our own home. The weeks that followed Elena's dramatic exit were strangely quiet. The phone didn't ring. There were no unexpected knocks at the door. It was as if a constant, low-grade hum of anxiety that I hadn't even been fully aware of had suddenly been switched off. The silence was unsettling at first, but it quickly became peaceful. Mark and I focused on the last few preparations for the baby's arrival. We finished the nursery, and it was everything I had dreamed of. The gentle sage walls, the warm wooden crib, the soft, hand-knitted blanket from my mother draped over the rocking chair. It was a room built not just with love, but with conviction. Every time I walked into it, I felt a sense of profound peace and accomplishment. It was our space, defended and won. A week after the dinner, Mark received a notification from his bank. A direct deposit of $2,350 had appeared in our account. The reference line simply read, "Invoice 1." There was no note, no email, no apology, just the money. It was a cold, transactional admission of defeat. Elena was a proud woman, and I knew that paying that invoice must have felt like swallowing glass, but she had done it. A few days later, Mark got an email from the storage company confirming that the contents of his unit had been cleared out. She had reclaimed her furniture, leaving us with nothing but the space we wanted. We still hadn't heard from her directly. The silence stretched from 1 week into 2, then 3. We wondered if this was it, if she had chosen to cut us out of her life entirely rather than accept our terms. Part of me was relieved at the thought, but another part, the part that looked at Mark's sad expression when he checked his phone, felt a pang of sorrow. He loved his mother, despite everything. He hadn't wanted to sever the relationship, only to mend it into a healthier shape. The baby came a week before her due date, a beautiful, healthy little girl we named Lily. The first few days were a blur of joy, exhaustion, and overwhelming love. We were a family. We sent out a simple announcement text to family and friends with a picture of our daughter. We sent one to Elena, too, without any expectation of a response. To our surprise, she replied within minutes. The text simply said, "She's beautiful. Congratulations. May I visit you in the hospital?" Mark and I looked at each other, having a silent conversation. This was the first test of our new reality. We talked it over and agreed on our terms. Mark texted back, "Thank you, we'd like that. We are in room 304. Visiting hours end at 8 p.m. Please call first when you're on your way." We were polite, but we were in control. We set the time, and we required the courtesy of a call. She called 30 minutes later, her voice soft on the phone. "I'm leaving now. I'll be there in 20 minutes, she said. When she arrived at the hospital room, she seemed smaller, more subdued. She didn't sweep in with a flurry of opinions and commands. She stood hesitantly at the door until Mark beckoned her in. Her eyes went straight to the baby sleeping in my arms. "Oh, Teresa," she whispered, her voice cracking slightly. "She's perfect." She didn't ask to hold her right away. She waited. After a few minutes, I offered, "Would you like to hold your granddaughter, Alina?" Her eyes filled with tears as she nodded. I gently passed Lily into her arms. Alina held her with a tenderness I had never seen in her before, rocking her gently and stroking her tiny cheek. She didn't offer a single piece of advice. She didn't comment on the hospital blanket or the way I had dressed her. She was just a grandmother, meeting her grandchild for the first time. Her visit lasted only half an hour. Before she left, she looked at both of us, her expression one I couldn't quite read. It was a mixture of regret and something else, perhaps a grudging respect. "You have a beautiful family," she said. "You're good parents." It wasn't the explicit, heartfelt apology I had once craved, but coming from Alina, it was as close as we were ever going to get. It was an acknowledgement. She was acknowledging our unit, our capability, our autonomy. Our relationship with Alina is different now. It is more distant, but it is also healthier. She visits, but she always calls first. She brings small, appropriate gifts for Lily. She keeps her opinions on our home and our parenting to herself. Sometimes I see a flicker of the old Alina, a critical comment forming on her lips, but she catches herself and swallows it. She knows the price of speaking it. The boundaries we built that day are holding firm. The phone in our house is silent unless it rings with a scheduled call. The nursery is quiet, filled only with the soft sounds of our daughter sleeping. We built our future on our own terms, and it is more peaceful than I could have ever imagined. We lost the illusion of a perfect, easy family, but we gained something far more valuable: respect and a home that is truly our own.